Hi, everybody. My name is Ember Kelly, and I'm the Director of Religious Education at the Fourth Universalist Society in the city of New York. As part of our religious education program, we offer a monthly In Conversation series covering different topics that are either good for spiritual development, educational, relevant to the current moment in time. And today, I'm just really excited. Our theme for October has been about identity, community, how these ideas work together. And I'm really excited to be joined by a live guest all the way from the Netherlands, uh, Leneth of the Spiritual Feminist, who's going to be with us today to explore some of these issues, talking with me. So Leneth, thanks for coming today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really, really excited to be here. Yeah.
So to start things out, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and about the Spiritual Feminist?
Yes. Like you said, I'm from the Netherlands, born and raised, and I'm now living here as well. Really enjoying it though. I didn't think I would. I kind of had to come back from traveling because obviously global pandemic. And I was like, oh, I have to go back to Netherlands. But no, it's been good. It's been nice. So that's me. And last year, at the start of Well, at the start of let's say at the start of this year, I quit my job. It's kind of a difficult timeline, but start of this year, I quit my job, 9 to 5, office life, the corporate worlds that most of us are very familiar with. And I did that because I knew that there was something there that just wasn't me. There was something there that was holding me back. And last year, I started this platform really online. It started with an Instagram account and very quickly followed by a podcast called The Spiritual Fem and The Spiritual Feminist for long. And I started to explore sides of me that I didn't even know I was hiding in a way, spirituality, womanhood, feminism. And I really kind of started that from a very intuitive place of hey, I can see other people sort of talking about this online, but I'm not really sure what this means to me. So I started this account to explore that for myself and this podcast in that way to really find my voice in this whole sort of field of spirituality and womanhood and empowerment in that. And as I was doing that more and more, I was still working that corporate job, and that just didn't mix in that way. I started to really uncover parts of myself and explore my femininity and see how spirituality was so linked to all of that. And I was like, oh, this corporate job and this system of me having to be there of 9 to 5 and usually even 8 to 5. And I was like, there's just something not right about that. So I saved up and I saved up and I saved up some more. And then I decided to leave that job and to, first of all, explore the world. But I guess 2020 has allowed me to explore the spiritual femme from all different angles and all different sides. And in that has allowed me to make a living out of it, which is incredible. So that's kind of a little bit of a background of how I got there, I guess. And the spiritual femme really is all about how spirituality, womanhood, and feminism all weave in together. For me, focusing on my spirituality, I started to feel more into my intuition, which is such a feminine trait. We all have it, but it's much more rooted in feminine energy. It's very flowy. It's very, and it's very strong, of course, as well. It's not necessarily soft feminine. It's very, very fierce and strong, powerful female energy. But it comes from a different type of frequency in that way. So for me, it was all very much linked, and that's what the spiritual femme is all about. So how can you feel into self-empowerment and self-development from a place of trust that there is more out there that is supporting you, however you may feel into that, however you may call it. I usually call it universal energy. But also trust that you have that within yourself, you're an innate, powerful being. It's just that you are then invited to uncover that again. So I think that it's always difficult to sum up the spiritual femme, but I think today we'll go with that.
Hey, if doing church work has taught me anything, it's that it's often hard to describe what exactly all of it means. It's just kind of a big blob of
Yes.
things sometimes. So I
There's not
understand.
really like, sometimes when people ask me, so what is it exactly that you do? I'm like, good question.
You just answer yes. I just do it all, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's a calling to spiritual work. It's not always the most clear, but it's something that kind of drives you crazy if you don't get to do it. Um,
Exactly. And I don't think it's a bad thing that we can't always define these things, because that just means that we can't really box it up. And I'm all about breaking through these boxes and these sort of limitations that we're meant to put on ourselves. So um, if I can't really explain it, I guess that is actually a good thing. Yeah. But for the sake of being concise, I don't know. I've never been really good at being concise.
well, so would you say that this is kind of a calling? Maybe like is it like a something that you feel like now that you've got into the work and started doing the work that you realize that maybe you've kind of felt this call towards this your whole life, even maybe a little.
I guess so. It's always it's hindsight is a funny thing, isn't
Right,
it? Because
right.
people ask me like, how did you start with the spiritual femme? And I never really have an answer to that, because like I said, I just kind of started, like I felt the pull and I did it. And that's how I've often been about my life, where it's like if I find something or I don't find something and I'm like, I wish I saw that in the world, or I wish that was there, I just kind of go and create it. So that is like my strong intuitive fire, just like doing it, not thinking about it too much. And I'm glad that it was the same for this, platform. So in hindsight, there are so many things I get to explore right now in terms of my own qualities and things that I enjoy and things that I like to grow in, that I've been working on my entire life. Space holding for people, but also being creative, using certain texts and putting them in such a way that it's also inspiring for people who might feel really overwhelmed by reading certain books or spiritual texts or things like that. Like all of these things, I've been doing that forever, really. Not that my life is already so long, but you know what I mean. So I I think yes, but never from a super conscious point where I was looking for a purpose or I was looking for my calling. I think it kind of just it started to really, I've now found something where I can explore so many things that I enjoy and that really speak to me and that really also speak to my character. So I guess in that way, that's a calling. But it's not like I chose this one thing and it was super clear. It's kind of just been that journey of like, hey, I really enjoy doing this. Let's run with it and see what it can be and see how it can grow. And I'm still in that process now. So I guess yes and no in that way.
Oh, that makes sense. Well, I mean, I know in our podcast and also in the other podcasts, and really just in a lot of the conversations that I've been having this month around our themes of identity and community, is thinking about how we do grow and shift, and how like it's
Mm-hmm.
it's okay to change, and it's okay for us to really strongly identify something at one time and
Oh,
then move
yes.
on from that at another time, and that's a very like important healthy concept to actually be developing, that it's okay to both have an identity and change and grow and follow your intuition.
I think that's key to everything. And I think if I look at myself, I was always quite scared to try new things because it's scary to be a beginner at something and it's scary to like start out somewhere. Um, but looking back on those moments, I think what's key is to be conscious of your own rooting. Like you can be super rooted in this moment and then explore other things. But if you're not rooted in who you are, it's not really gonna it's not really gonna help you on your journey in that way. What I mean by that is that now that I'm a lot more rooted in the present moment of who I am right now, I'm can be more okay with that changing maybe in the next hour or so. You know what I mean? It's like it's okay because I am rooted in who I am right now, and then I'm open to flowing with that. I think it's a very interesting balance there. So yeah, being okay with change and actually getting excited about change, because I think if you're not changing, I think change is something that's actually we think always of that as a bad thing, like, oh, that person's really changed. And I'm like, yes, thank goodness she did, because who wants to be stagnant? Who wants to be, again, that links back to like being in a box. Like if we're always like the same, that means we're always in this little box. And that just doesn't, it's not what we're meant to be doing. It's not what we're meant to do in this beautiful life that we have here. I think we're all being called to change and shift and learn and be beginners at something, and then maybe stay beginners for the rest of our lives at living life, and that's fine. But yeah, kind of exploring all of these corners of yourself and see what that could mean to you. I think that's also rooted in my work, where I always say, like, hey, this is my truth right now. If you listen back to a podcast episode of mine that I recorded when I just started, which was summer 2019, I have no idea what I said in those podcast episodes, and it could be completely different with something I talk about now. And that's okay. And it really was a process for me to embrace that, because these podcasts are there and people are going to think, oh, that's how Leneth thinks. And maybe it's not anymore. Maybe I've changed, or maybe I changed my language around something, because I'm always learning and growing and evolving too. And I have to be okay with that. And actually, I'm celebrating that, because I also know that those types of podcast episodes sometimes reach people on a path, on like a point in their journey, on a point in their path, that they really needed to hear those words that I channeled a year and a half ago. So these changes are actually something we can embrace, because we're all growing and evolving, and we can all meet each other in those changes. Yeah, I don't know how I got to that, but
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think that sort of point of view is so much healthier than like, looking at some aspects of my own life. There's often this future focus, and I think I was reading it actually in a book by a Buddhist monk today. But thinking about that, everybody wants that everything's going to be perfect when you finally get to this point in your life, instead of learning to appreciate and love the journey that we're in.
And it's hard though, isn't it? Because yeah, it's such a myth to think, oh, well, once I have A, B, and C, X, Y, and Z, I will be happy, or I will be content, or there will be peace in my life. Because there will always be other things to feel into or to deal with in that moment. And it is hard to be content in the present moment, because in the present moment there are usually very real things to be worried about, or to be sad about, to be angry about. So of course we're going to look into the future for medicine in that way, but you're also then really bypassing, I guess, the beautiful moments that are in the present moment. And in the end, not to get too philosophical, but in the end, all you have is the present moment. Of course, such a like cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. All you have is the present moment. So to always live in the future. And I actually also was like this. I always used to, and I'm still such a dreamer. I'm such a dreamer. So I do actually live a lot in the future, being like, oh, what could happen if this? What could happen if that? But if this year has taught me anything, is that actually embrace the present moment, because you don't know 2 months from now. You don't know 2 years from now. Like no one really truly has control, and should we want to anyway. Different story, different conversation. But yeah, like all you do actually have is the present moment. So can you find little things of happiness and contentment, and little sparks of joy in that moment? Can you create those for yourself? And that's actually when the empowerment starts, right? Can I bring it back to myself, and can I take up that space?
Yeah, so I feel like that kind of relates back to our themes for the month of identity and community. So like, when I put together these themes, those perhaps those to me in my mind kind of seemed like two very separate things. But the more time I've spent educating on it, talking with people about it this month, I've realized just how like intertwined identity and community can really be. So how do you, from your perspective, see identity and community interacting with each other as concepts?
I love this. So in my work for the Spiritual Fem, I facilitate women's circles as one thing that I do. And I have done since I started the platform. Actually, like very shortly after I started the platform, I was like, let's do women's circles. I have no idea how to do that, but I'm going to do it. Again, I'm just always diving into those sorts of things when I feel called to. And that's actually been not just for myself, but I'll speak for myself. The moment that I found myself in those types of communities where it was a safe space for me to exist fully, really, to meet all sides of myself, to allow myself to feel everything and talk about things that I would usually just kind of brush over or suppress, or it doesn't have a place and my family doesn't need to know about this, or just things like that. The minute that I found myself in spaces like that, something shifted because I realized it was safe to embrace all sides of me. And that's kind of when you're like, oh, but then I can actually take up like this space. And if I can take up this space, this means that I'm going to explore what it means to, like, in my case, be a woman, be a spiritual being, being a spiritual woman. What does that mean to me? And from doing that in those spaces, I started to do that a whole lot more in other areas of my life as well. I started to speak my truth a lot more in other spaces because I learned how to do that in safe and sacred communities. So for me, it shifted a lot. Also, obviously, holding these spaces and creating these safe spaces for others shifted a lot as well. But just in general, I realized and I saw with others how healing it can be to just show up. Like there's really nothing you need to do but to bring your full self and explore what that means. So that's kind of my experience in terms of communities. And through that, I really got to explore sides of my identity that thus far I've been suppressing. So I think for me, those are definitely linked. I can imagine why at first you're like, oh, but those two are separate because your identity comes from yourself. But what I've been learning over the past, well, especially year and a half, as I've also been letting in these communities, because that's, I guess, a whole different topic, but also similar. It's also about opening yourself up in these communities and finding the courage to do that, because that's huge. Like that's not something that many of us feel immediately comfortable with doing, and that's okay. But doing that is it really shifted a lot because it showed me that we're actually not meant to do all of these things on our own. You're not meant to explore your identity on your own. I think that is such a myth that we're moving into, or we've already moved into, I guess, into such an individualistic society where we're all on our own little islands. And I beg to kind of explore that and to differ with that, because I believe actually within my spirituality, how I feel into my spirituality, we're all connected. Everything's connected together. Everything is amazing, like strong energy. And when you see it like that, we actually do need to collaborate. There's no way that I can feel my full identity and feel into all corners of myself without inviting in other things, beings, people, into communities. At least, of course, you still have, the choice who you're going to invite in as close as you want to. But yeah, I think identity and community are incredibly strongly linked, actually, for me in that way.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, it really just helps us have that space to more safely discover our own
Mm.
identities. Yeah, I think you
Mm-hmm.
captured that well. So, as somebody who does that work to facilitate those kind of spaces, what do you think are kind of key elements for like a good communal space or a good community?
I mean, define good, right?
Well,
But no, I know what
back
you
in
mean.
seminary.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I immediately was thinking of like bad communities, and that's like we all have the examples of that, I guess. But for me, doing this work, but also really immersing myself into the offerings of others, I've really been able to explore different types of space holding in that way. And I think for me, a good or safe, let's say, like a safe community where people can fully explore themselves and feel held and seen. I think a huge thing of that is that there are spaces where they can fully embrace themselves. So for me, that really means that it's not necessarily a place of like fixing, because that is rooted in the idea that you're broken. And I don't believe that. So for me, in my women's circle specifically, I actually lay like a ground rule of we don't really give advice. This is not necessarily a talking group in the sense of like a conversational group. We actually just share and listen. So I think that's kind of the second thing, or probably quite linked, listening. I think good communities actually listen more than they talk back to someone when they share. I think the way our society kind of functions, or the way that I see it anyway, is that we often listen to give a response. So in that way, also we listen to fix because we want to give advice. We want to put a band-aid on it, right? We don't really want to have people feel hurt or feel pain, and it comes from the right intention usually, but subconsciously it's also like, hey, I'm putting a band-aid on this because I don't want to see you broken. Like, I don't, like, our society doesn't really allow that. So I think for me, being in a safe and good community means that I can speak my truth. I can tell, like, I can just speak about my rough day or my mental health not being the best, things like that, without people immediately being like, okay, you should do this, this, and this, but actually just listening and being like, hey, I see you for this. And I am holding space for that. And there's really not much else that I think is required then, because you're just seeing the person for all aspects of them. And I think that that is incredibly important. Do you agree? Like, do you feel into it in a similar way?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I mean, I was pondering as I was listening. Well, I was trying not to listen, just to respond.
I mean, I guess this is a bit different,
It
but
was slightly different, but I was thinking about that. But no, I was thinking about like my own like coming out experience. I was thinking
Mhm.
about um gosh, church work, looking for trying to figure out what my calling was, trying to think about lots of those sorts of things, and how yeah, anytime like there's so many conversations that I would try and talk about it, and I just would want people to understand what was going on in my life. I didn't need them to like solve the problem, but I needed like real sympathy. But everybody is just, we're all trained to so quickly like be like, okay, well, let's fix that for you. Here's my advice on how you fix it. So yeah, I
Yeah,
definitely feel into a really similar thing, and it takes work to develop that listening.
definitely, because we're well, from the moment that we're born, we're literally, we grow up in a society that tells us to always put a band-aid on it and always fix it, and always kind of cover it up. And for some people maybe more than others, it also depends on, for instance, what type of family that you grew up in, whether there was space to talk about certain things or not. And then you sometimes find yourself in these patterns, and it's hard to break those. But I think in communities where that is a possibility, that is wonderfully radical. Let's say that is incredible, because we don't do it enough in day-to-day life. And I think, I'm not I'm not an angel. I still do this. I still catch myself out talking to friends, or sometimes even um to one-on-one clients, and I'm like, am I actually like giving advice? Like, this is not really. And I'm like, oh wait, from what type of energy am I coming, right? What am I actually trying to do here? And can I reel it back into being like, I'm just your space holder. I am not judging. Same with friends. Like, I'm not just talking about, about like sort of work relationships in my work, but same with friends. Like, I think it's radical to just allow your friends to um, tell their story, and just be there. And I think as well, when what you said, it really reminded me, if you feel like you need to respond in a way, ask questions, try to understand, like you said, like ask questions instead of coming up with an advice, because 9 out of 10 times, like, you don't even really need to do that.
Well, and you'll always get, a year down the line, then said friend that you didn't actually offer any advice to, but you held that space, and they'll be like, "Wow, you helped me so much." And you're like, "Wait, I didn't actually do anything."
Yes.
It's
Yes, you're
all
like,
in
I
you.
just
You
sat there. This is so true. This is so true. It gets to be, well, I don't want to say it gets to be easy, but you actually just need to lean back a little bit. And I think that is radical in itself. Like, just lean back. It's okay. Like, no one's actually broken. We're all just moving through life.
Right.
And that's all we can do.
Right. Well, I mean, and part of seminary for me was doing like classes on pastoral care, and also like it's
Hmm.
called clinical pastoral education. So it's like a chaplaincy kind of work, like that spiritual care, or like as part of one of my internships, like I got to the pastor of the church was going in for surgery, and I got to go pray with his family and be there and hold that space for them. And for like, to me, I felt like so inadequate and felt so like, oh, what do I do? But you realize that like you don't have to do much. You just have to
Hmm.
be
Hmm.
there. You have to be in relationship. That's what's powerful for people.
Fully showing up, fully being there. Because I think if you are listening to give an answer, you are with one sort of 50% is in your heart, but 50% is in your mind. So if you fully there to just listen and hold that space, you are completely in your heart, and that is the energy that you want to give someone. So yeah, in the end, you don't even have to, like, quote unquote, do much. But sometimes it can feel like more of an effort than showing up with our minds. Definitely.
Right. Going back a little bit, I think
Hmm.
one of as you were talking, it got me thinking about like that. If we're gonna gender these responses,
Hmm.
like that this society is very much about like this problem, solve the problem. This very like, we got to fix it. It's got to be better. And there's no real acknowledgement that life flows and has cycles, and that we're going to have the ups and downs. It's this dichotomy that society's kind of created, that it's just, we figure out the problem, we figure out the solution, we do it, it doesn't work, then we figure out the solution to the new problem, instead of like acknowledging that life goes in these flows and circles, and that
Yes.
sometimes you just need that person holding space for you when you're at that low point in the cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. It's like, I think linearity is such an illusion, but it is what a lot of people are working on, consciously, unconsciously. Um, but definitely embracing the cycles. And I think for myself, that's been such a eye opener, connecting more to that cyclical way of being, where things just sometimes they just come back. And again, for me, it definitely connects me to my spirituality as well as my womanhood, being like, hey, I'm a cyclical being. We're all living in certain cycles, seasonal cycles, if anything, but also lunar cycle. Just you can connect to as many cycles as you like, really. Um, and that has actually really allowed me to embrace like emotions, because I realized, hey, it's okay if this like comes back. I'm healing. So in a way, I'm stepping up, and I'm, figuring out my stuff, and I'm moving through life. But like we said before, with growth, we're growing, we're always evolving. So new things will come up, or old things, because new things will come up, old things will come up too. And that's okay. And really embracing those cycles, and just allowing yourself to be, and allowing yourself to feel that and not judge it. And then finding yourself in spaces where other people also reciprocate that for you is incredible. Like that for me truly has been the biggest thing for my own empowerment journey.
Well, as you were talking about linearity there, it got me thinking about just how weird this moment is with being online, and how it's really challenging, people's perception of how to do work, how to do, everybody is used to like this 9 to 5 work week, or like we have
Hmm.
events at this set time. And whereas like now, like when I'm planning an event like this, I think like, okay, well, I have the event, and we'll put up the YouTube so that maybe people can watch it down the line or something. You and I know you do similar in your own work. Like you maybe have like a live Zoom call or an Instagram live, but then you post it later for more people to watch. So like,
Hmm.
I feel like this moment of suddenly everybody being thrust into much more digital interaction has really challenged people to think about community and about time and about how their life flows so much differently, because like it's disrupted everything that we once knew.
So true. And yeah, I was actually gonna say flow, as you said it as well. I think if anything, it showed us that, well, for me, let's speak for myself. It showed me that I can trust a lot more in the flow of things, that I can release the illusion of control. I thought I had control over my life, but it actually allowed me to feel into a lot more trust in that as well. Trust in, if things don't grow right now, or if things don't happen right now, that's okay. Like, it's all such cycles and such, it always keeps coming back to you in that way. So I think, yeah, for me, it's also really I've been able to cultivate a lot more trust. And don't get me wrong, I've also had some of the lowest mental health moments of my life in this year, simply because it is so much. And no one can really prepare you for this, because the generations that live now have never really experienced anything like this. Like, we're all in this together 100%, but like, no one can really be like, oh yeah, from experience. It's like, not many people have experienced the pandemic.
A time I had a previous global pandemic that I lived through.
It's a very long time ago.
Right.
So yeah, I feel like, for me, as much as I've been experiencing the lows, in that I've also been able to really see, okay, let's flow with this. What is this low telling me? And how can I then trust that, it is a cycle. So I will start to feel a lot better again, and I will start to feel into a high again. And then, of course, yeah, there is a low, but you do grow and evolve, and you get stronger through it. But it is all a cycle. And for me, that's been a great comfort, actually. Yeah.
Right. I know, especially when I was in Vietnam back in March, April, when we were really, really strictly locking ourselves down just to play it safe because so much was still unknown. One of the things that was really powerful for me is that was when I was really discovering, like, paying attention to the moon cycle, and setting intentions around that and journaling around that. I'd been doing it for a few months at that time, but it was just so powerful to have some cycle to, like, refer to when everything felt like it was becoming meaningless in terms of the flow of time. So
Yes. Oh gosh, I couldn't agree more. It's nice to find those types of things that give some structure in a way, yes, but also within that, I think it's not the structure that the 9 to 5 gives us, and that is really sort of man-made in that way, but it's actually a structure that has been around for longer than we've been around as human beings. And it's something that really connects us to something bigger than ourselves. The moon, like, you look up, you look outside, and you're like, she's always there. Well, we can sometimes obviously not see her with the new moon, but she's always there, and it's something to hold on to. And I love that you mentioned that, because I think definitely in times of uncertainty, it can be really nice to find things like that, which, yes, are outside of yourself, but they're always there, and they're also in some way affecting your inner being. And it can really, for me, connecting to the moon cycles was one of the first things I did, and that really showed me how interconnected everything is, and how my spirituality spoke in that way to me. So yeah, I love that. I can definitely agree with that.
so with the challenge of suddenly being online, part of your work has always been online.
Mm-hmm.
What I think for a lot of people, for me, for my generation, as a 32-year-old, as a born in the late 80s, I grew up making internet friends. Like, that was pretty normal for me. But suddenly we're thrust into this world where, like, most of our community is suddenly online instead of in
Mm-hmm.
person. So what challenges have you had? What beauty have you had, like, in terms of suddenly your community work being mostly online?
Yeah, I think it's both had such high, deep positives, and it has like certain negatives, I would say, or like downsides to it. Um, I mean, a huge positive is obviously that I get to connect with people all around the world. This was also the main reason. Yes, exactly. That's why we're here now. It's also the main reason I've always decided to do things in English. I feel very natural speaking in English. I feel it's not my native language, it's not my mother tongue, but I feel very, very comfortable doing it in English, and it's allowed me to connect to people all over the world, which has been amazing. So I think that that is the biggest plus, and also the biggest drive for me to continue doing things online for as long as I can, and as long as I feel good doing it. But of course I miss hosting women's circles, like in real life, in like the physical world. Um, and I think especially because this year specifically, I've been building a business out of it and it's all been online, it sometimes feels very, I guess the direct translation would be like untouchable, but it's not fully like what I want to express with that. It sometimes feels a little bit not real because it's all
Ephemeral was the word that popped into my head.
okay. Well, it's just all a bit like it can sometimes feel quite up in the air. It's all like in this screen and in this screen, and it's like, is it actually real? And it is, because I'm creating a business out of it, and very real things and very real effects come from that. But I think nothing um there's nothing better than to actually come together in a physical space and get that energy like that. I've had very powerful healings and community spaces and gatherings online, and I definitely believe in that it can be as powerful as offline gatherings. 100%. There's been so many amazing things that I've been able to experience, either as a space holder or someone who as a someone who attends spaces, I guess. But there is that element of coming together physically, choosing to be there in a physical space. And also, I love hosting. So my women's circles, I always just love to really create like a beautiful space and really, dress it up nice and buy flowers. And it would give me an excuse to bake for a lot of people. Now I'm just like stuffing my freezer with banana bread and things like that because, it's just me. So it's just like little things like that as well, where there's a part of me, I can't do that, so that part of me is like, a bit sad about it. But there is definitely something to say for both. Yeah, and I just sometimes have to remind myself that my platform and my job and the conversations that I have with people through DMs and voice notes and things, they are very real. It just sometimes doesn't, I have to remind myself of that sometimes. Yeah, I think it's important to do that.
I mean, I definitely feel that having moved and started this job uh, in an all digital setting. I mean, it's possibly been it's been such a blessing and so wonderful and so exciting to really feel like that I'm living out my calling and getting to do this exciting work. But then I'm like, I've only met like most of these people all online, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think that um, there's many ways that it can be a blessing. There's so many ways that it can be powerful, but yeah,
Hmm.
either I just kind of wish that I could like actually to meet everybody. Like, it
Yeah.
it still feels like there is this quality that like is this. It still feels so unreal. Like, oh, hey, I moved to New York City and I started a new job, and
Yeah.
but yet I've only been to the building for the church twice. Um, like
This
it,
is the thing, right? It's also about like rooting down, and it's so important to be in like to connect yourself to the physical space around you and rooting down, and it can then sometimes feel quite literally up in the air. I mean, everything, I'm connected to Wi-Fi right now. Everything's like up in the air, literally.
mm,
So to bring ourselves down from that and to really, I moved as well during a pandemic, which is also something that we've been talking about together. It's like it's such a crazy experience to really feel into a new city and a new environment and new communities in these times. It's so weird because for the most part it's actually not really happening. But then also at some point, a couple of months ago, I did sort of at some point have the choice where I could start to feel into offline women's circles again, like physical women's circles, because the restrictions were lifted a little bit at that time. So I was like, well, I could, for a couple of people, but I just didn't feel comfortable about it, because when somebody afterwards comes up to me and she tells me more of her story, or there's some emotions at play, I want to give that person a hug. And you can't do that right now. I haven't hugged anyone besides my mom for a really long time. So it's like, is it really the right time for me to then gather these people here? Because we will still feel restricted, and I don't want to feel that way in these spaces. So for me, online circles have been a blessing in that way, because you actually can come together and share and be together in that space safely. But it is definitely strange. It's a strange thing to only have that. I think in an ideal world, I would have both. And hoping, of course, that next year that will happen again. Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, and that's with starting this position, I've largely been trying to think the stuff that I'm working on in this all digital setting. I want to continue it when we go back in person
Yes,
still too,
exactly.
because it provides us so many unique opportunities, when we can connect with people from around the world in our services and in our education. Like, it's
Hmm.
just, there's really cool opportunities. But yeah, even as somebody that grew up mostly online, making friends online, yeah, it would be nice to get to be in that physical community. Just hopefully we can get Corona under control in the US eventually. But that's a whole nother day
Fingers crossed.
conversation.
Yeah.
So kind of as a last question from me, and then we'll turn off the recording and open up for community questions. And feel free also to leave questions in the comments. I'll keep an eye on those if you're watching this on YouTube. So I think, when most people hear the words spiritual fem, spiritual feminist,
Hmm.
they see these as, identities, and, American politics, like this whole idea of identity politics is this whole big like talk word that, like, kind of one side is saying it's horrible and the other side is like running with it all the time. And so identities kind of almost become like a dirty word over here. And people get nervous to claim an identity because they don't want to put themselves in a box.
Hmm.
They don't want to have that limit. Uh, so do you think that there's good that can be found, like liberation that can be found in learning to claim that identity and space for ourselves?
Mm. I think it's so personal, but I sure did. I really, really claimed or found liberation in claiming those two words as sort of like part of my identity. I sometimes have to remind myself that, like, yes, I think that I'm a spiritual feminist, but it's not all I am, right? It's like, it's okay to also be other things. Um, but for me to reclaim the word spiritual feminist and to come at it quite, like, it makes sound quite strong for some people. I know that it did for me when I first sort of started to like download those terms and that sort of title for the podcast and things like that. I also realized that because it felt so scary, there was something to win there. There was something to reclaim there. I'm like, okay, so why does it feel scary to claim this? Because it's exactly the opposite of what society wants me to claim, what my conditioning is telling me to do. So for me, it was actually really liberating to be like, no, I'm a spiritual feminist, because within that, I get to decide what that means for me, right? So I kind of not coined that term, but I felt into that term and started to use it a lot more, because I realized that that was a just a new way to see myself, and a lot more of it like an empowering way to see myself. And obviously I had people around me being like, oh well, should you be calling yourself like a feminist though, like should you maybe do something else with that? And I was like, no. I was like, I'll consider that for like a second. I'm like, no, because there's a reason for me to claim those, because to claim those words and to claim those labels, spiritual and feminist, and together as well, right? Which is pretty much everything that a whole lot of people in society don't really either agree on or feel very uncomfortable with. But it was for myself. It was to really show myself, like, hey, I'm so much more than what I maybe graduated in, what I'm working on right now. Like, often, people come at you and they're like, oh, hey, what's your name and what do you do? And that's your identity. And I don't agree with that, because we're so much more than that. Like, let's actually be like, hey, what's your name? What are you passionate about? What are you feeling into in life? Like, how are you doing? Like, things like that. Like, what is going on in your life right now? How are you feeling into things? And I think for me, then, yes, reclaiming parts of my identity in that way has been incredibly powerful. But it all depends on how you feel into it. If you feel like it's limiting you, then don't do it. And maybe you find certain words to empower yourself in different ways. I think, you know, in many ways, we do need language to make sense of the world. Not always. Like, our mind is only just a tool. We don't necessarily need language for everything. There's also, the five senses and our feelings, and how we can use our bodies in that too. But I think there's language that we can use to either disempower or empower ourselves. So if you feel like certain labels don't suit you or don't suit you anymore, leave them, which is very easy for me to say. And I understand that's very much a journey for many people. I know that it has been for me in my own ways. But reclaiming some can actually be really powerful too. And that for me has been with the spiritual feminist, where I'm like, I know it's strong. And I know that it feels kind of like, oh, am I actually that? Yes, because I get to decide what it means to be a spiritual feminist. And that's changing every single day or week or month. Like, that changes over time. Like I said, I can record a podcast now and come from quite a different standpoint perhaps than last year. And that's fine. Like, we're all shifting and changing, maybe especially even this year. We're kind of being forced to change and shift. So you get to decide what those labels mean to you. And I think as long as that feels empowering, do it. But if it doesn't, if it feels limiting, then that's not the type of language you need to use for yourself. And it gets to be a journey. And I think it's an interesting exploration in that. Yeah.
Definitely. Wonderful. I think that's a great place for us to wrap up the questions for me. Where can people find you online for those watching now and in the future on YouTube?
Yes. So easiest way is Instagram, I think, which is the Spiritual Fem, Fem at the end. That's also my website, thespiritualfem.com. So those are kind of the two places where you can really have a feel into my energy, my offerings, the things that I'm working on, which again are also always shifting and changing because these things are built on intuition. So that's the two places where you can really find me. And then my podcast, The Spiritual Feminist, which you can listen to pretty much anywhere you can listen to podcasts.
Yes, and you can listen to. We recorded a podcast for the Fourth U Dimension, and I also recorded a podcast on your podcast. So I'm going to make sure to share that on my church's Facebook as well.
Amazing. Yeah, that was so fun.
Yeah. So thanks for everybody who watched on YouTube. We're going to stop recording.